And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Robert Mallett. We are so thrilled when he accepted our speaker invitation because Robert brings such a unique perspective to the table, having worn leadership hats in the public sector as Deputy Secretary of Commerce in the private sector, as Senior Vice President of Pfizer, and in the nonprofit sector as President and CEO of Africare. Currently CEO of Rabin Martin, Robert's past experience gives him a wide range of leadership perspectives, and when we think he's just perfect to set the stage for us today. Thank you, Robert, for being here, and now over to you.
Thank you, EJ. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Welcome you to the forum in the same way that EJ has done, who gave part of my speech today. Now, some of you may be back in your regular work office. I know that many of you are joining us from your homes, your makeshift offices, wherever they are around the world. And I am here in the basement of my home in Washington, D.C., just outside of Washington, D.C. And I'm honored to have been asked to chat with you today. And I want to thank EJ and all of her incredible team for organizing this fantastic event. And more broadly, I want to thank PQMD for its enduring leadership in ensuring that quality medicines reach people who need them the most. Even in the face of ongoing global turmoil, PQMD's efforts and the work of everyone here today remain a critical tool in our collective efforts to improve health. I thank all of you for your ongoing commitments to this cause. Now, speechifying in this virtual format, which is a first for me, and a very uneasy first, I want you to know, giving a speech with no audience that I can interact with personally, that I can touch, although speakers like me ought not be trying to touch this audience these days. This is a different kind of experience for me. And such is the fact that I can talk with you in this tube, more people in more places at the same time. It's a wonder to me, a different kind of experience. And such is the wonder of technology and innovation, that it makes it possible for us to be together. It has created a community out of all of us today. Now, it's been a year of upheaval for everyone. 2020 felt like what we thought the year 2000, Y2K, was going to be. And unlike Y2K, 2020 was a year we did not plan for. At least the plans we had, or thought we had, were pretty close to useless, especially within our health systems. Patient care changed. Elective surgeries, even cancer and heart surgery, postponed. Rationing care happened by default. Who was placed on ventilators, who got admitted to hospitals, in some instances, became a God decision. Travel was disrupted. Our education systems the world over quickly had to adapt. I recall my good friend, Dr. Alice Coutinho, he of Tasso and Accordia and IDI fame, explaining to me in vivid terms the social devastation caused by Ebola a few years ago in West Africa, how it tore communities apart, it devastated families, it caused suspicions, tribal competition, it changed rituals, it canceled work, and how children were not able to go to school and crops were not able to be harvested. Now, as so many Westerners do, I so clearly remember at the time he told me this, I so clearly remember thinking, and I should have known better. Well, certainly that could not happen here. Well, I was wrong then, and I was wrong to continue to think it. It did happen here. And the nature of work changed. Now, it has been a year that has tested our resilience, our patience, and the endurance of our physical and mental health. But it has also been a remarkable year for learning what our towering prowess in technology cannot alone or by itself overcome. It just so happens that an easily transmissible, deadly virus that travels across borders is a great equalizer. In few other ways do we have equality in the world, but the virus has made us all everywhere similarly vulnerable and fearful. And while that reality may not bring us any comfort, it has given us the opportunity to reimagine the usual things we do and how we do them. We're having this meeting virtually. I know we would all prefer to be in Paris, but we're having this meeting virtually, and it is taking place all the same. We have witnessed unparalleled innovation and change within the pharma sector alone, in governments and how governments work with the private sector, in our expectations of the private sector and government, the leadership and confidence we have placed in NGOs and civil society, and our reliance on all three of those partners, government, the private sector, and civil society, to deliver for us. There are new financing and R&D paradigms for vaccines and other essential goods. And in how each of these sectors work with communities to meet their needs. There has been so much change at such breathtaking speed, I fear that sometimes we do not fully acknowledge it. And certainly we do not understand its implications. What has been and what has happened in this last year has been dizzying in its scope and impact. Vaccines developed in record time, and vaccine development, as all of you know, is hard work and it has a long tail of research. Here, the work of AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Oxford, Pfizer and BioNTech, and countless other people in government and in other parts of academia and the private sector, they have altered the outlook on the pandemic. We now know that we can defeat it. We did not know that a year ago. But our praise should also go to those people and places who tried to develop a vaccine, but were unsuccessful to bring one to market. Theirs was not a labor in vain, because they unlocked questions that we did not know the answer to, and further unlocked the jigsaw. And we should be grateful for the knowledge that they bring to the table. And we should also resist the temptation to give this heroic effort a collective yawn, as we're ought to do as time passes, as if we knew it would turn out this way. We didn't. The COVAX facility was conceived to deliver life-saving vaccines to countries which are ordinarily the last to receive treatment. Today, COVAX has delivered vaccines to more than 100 economies since first delivery to Ghana in February of this year. More vaccines to at least 100 countries since February of this year. Vaccine manufacturing agreements among current competitors. Governments making meaningfully incentivizing advanced market commitments. Multiple sourcing strategies to de-risk supply chains. New joint financing schemes for R&D in certain disease areas have emerged. The maternal and child health facility part of the World Bank's offerings, social impact bonds, the encouraging array of enabling efforts to promote access in low and middle income countries by the Gates Foundation and others. New diagnostic techniques and approaches for ancient diseases like malaria and TB. The list goes on. There are many more. All of these are positive. They're narrative altering, and they're game-changing innovation. Or as Pfizer's CEO, Albert Bourla, said, the impossible can many times become possible. Now, what beyond the obvious salubrious effects on public health are we to make of all of this cooperation and structural innovation? Yes, it's had a positive reputational impact for the pharma sector, and Lord knows the sector needed it. But that is likely only temporal. Yes, it has produced some highly effective partnerships within and across sectors. Lord knows we needed it. Now, in my new role as CEO of Rabin Martin, which is a health strategy firm, I have spent a good bit of time recently thinking about what all of this really can mean, what it does mean. Perhaps it positions corporations, not just pharma, but corporations, especially pharma, as more relevant and essential societal partners. Perhaps. Time will tell. But for a moment, it seemed like the entire world, including the pharmaceutical industry, paused to reflect on their own activities and how they impact the world around them. One thing we see is that the hope of things returning to the previous norm is highly misplaced. Things are no longer normal, or perhaps, as they say, there's a new normal. We're in a new environment. Industry, all industries that matter to the well-being of humankind, must navigate a landscape where the public demands for private accountability are getting louder and more insistent. Companies are being asked and challenged to do more, nearly about everything, about health inequity, about inequality and injustice, climate change, and the environment, just to name a few that have been in the news lately. The pandemic has only accelerated what has already been an emerging trend, and it's been heartening for many years. All industries, but especially pharma, must pay attention to these demands for accountability, which is the real need for sustainability and ESG performance to be a real measurement of business value. Now, years ago, most companies, and some still do, saw a dichotomy between business value and social value, believing that the former, business value, is delivered by business leaders. Now, in pharma, that's R&D, finance, manufacturing, medical, maybe, marketing, and sales. Even legal tries to squeeze themselves in there. And the latter, social value, is delivered by everybody else doing everything else, especially the softer sides of companies, CSR and philanthropy and communications and public affairs and government affairs. I once was on the soft side of a company, so I know that feeling all too well. I remember an almost surreal conversation with a CEO about the way employees would be measured. Respect, executive attention, and reward were to be disproportionately showered on business persons, the people who make the money. Now, never mind that this was a wholly artificial and simple-minded understanding about what makes a company valuable. All of the things that go into that mix. You cannot discount half your house and expect to remain whole. Rather, as my colleague Jeff Sturcio has remarked, and many of you know Jeff, there needs to be a sustainability gestalt embedded in the thinking of corporations and their leaders. What this means is companies must embrace and understand what truly creates and represents value.
See if she can leave the room and come back in, or try to refresh the page.
ESG measurements become very critical. How a company interacts with society and through what channels and means must be more than an investor relations strategy. In practical terms, this means determining whether a company is part of the dialogue and brings solutions around the Sustainable Development Goals or the social determinants of health. What is it doing to advance those things? Does it understand the need to shrink its environmental footprint? How does it demonstrate it values its employees? And for pharma companies, access. Who gets it and how and on what terms? More than a passing attentiveness to these issues will lead to better business results and increased social value. What does a company pay attention to? Is it within the community it operates or apart from it? Witness today in the United States the expectations and demands of advocates and the public on companies around issues related to criminal justice and law enforcement and voting rights. Companies cannot duck these issues forever. They do not have to solve them, but I think they do need a point of view. And this entire forum is grounded in an ESG sustainability lens, and for good reason. It helps to companies to develop a point of view. It matters to your stakeholders, to your communities where you work and produce. It shapes a point of view when you interact with them. The good news for those of us attending this forum is that they are changing. In the face of these accountability demands, we're seeing the emergence of some positive patterns, many of which have been the result of organizations working to do more and acting in new ways towards a common aim. And even more good news is that this past year has taught us, especially corporations, all of us really, the virtue of allyship and partnership. We are better able to do big things when we discover the benefit of not doing them alone and ensuring that they are not divorced in some way from broader societal need. Imagine the power and impact we could have on other disease states if we worked as cooperatively on them as has been done on COVID. Never in the entire history of modern medicine have we seen the successful development and deployment of completely useful tools in such a short time. It does not have to be a one-time thing. Let me repeat that. This does not have to be a one-time thing. HIV/AIDS has been a public health scourge for over 4 decades, and yet we still haven't mobilized the resources necessary to end that epidemic. Maternal deaths are still far too frequent, despite the advances in healthcare. We know how to prevent maternal deaths. Malaria and TB are still dominant killers in the world. We do not have to accept these realities as immutable. Remember, the impossible can many times become possible. NGOs can utilize private sector capabilities, leveraging new technologies and supply chain expertise. But just as much, the private sector has much to learn from NGOs and civil society by utilizing their grassroots contacts and know-how and delivery capabilities that reach people at the grassroots level. And governments can lead, encourage, and reward. As we develop new technologies, we must consider their potential to transform healthcare. Innovation in and of itself is not the goal. Securing better outcomes is the goal. Serving more people better is the goal. improving and extending lives is the goal. Unless it can be accessed by all people, regardless of geography, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, gender, income, innovation is merely a mirage for too many people in the world. It is even perhaps a cruel joke. So we must demand as much of ourselves as unlocking access and advancing health equity, as we have done in our dogged determination to find vaccines, therapies, and cures. So over the course of the next few days, I challenge you to think about how to align and amplify your organization's purpose and sustainability platform to do more good, to partner with others more intentionally, especially in civil society, as they do the work to achieve the SDGs, to yield more impact, to in fact increase business value. This is how you will maintain your competitive edge on the global stage. Think of it like we did Y2K. The whole enterprise depends on getting this right. As I speak with you today, I am really quite optimistic about the future. This is because, for one thing, I know that everyone in this virtual meeting, which means you really want to be here, is here for the same reason. We want to do more to meet the needs of people everywhere. Our hearts are aligned, even if our behavior is sometimes not. So now, I ask you to learn, to listen, and to do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robert. That was completely inspiring, and I'm so excited about what you have posed to this audience. And I urge us all to remember access, access, access. I loved that. And the public demands for private accountability as a measure of value. I think that actually speaks to a broad cross-section of participants, whether you're an NGO or corporate. And I think that that's very exciting. We do have time for some questions right now. So if people have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and I will catch them and send them on to Robert if you have any questions.
So it seems like it's good stuff.
I actually have one that maybe can start us off. So I'm really interested in where you see the lower and middle income countries, in particular, those people who have been traditionally lacking in access to health. How do you see them being included in the ESG landscape? How do you while they are certainly beneficiaries, how can their voice be more heard, or are they heard, or how are they becoming part of the dialogue?
Well, thank you for the question. It's an interesting question, actually. We sometimes forget that people who live in lower middle income countries are not without agency. They have enormous agency. There are companies that work in those areas. There are people who live there or employees. I do believe their voices can be heard. Their voices can be marshaled. We see that in freedom movements around the world and in places that are considered middle-income countries. So I actually believe this idea of governments and civil society and the private sector working together can be a vision that people in lower and middle-income countries can also insist upon. I do not see them divorced from the movements to make the world more equal. Now, is there sort of an uneven distribution of power, or do NGOs, many Western-facing NGOs that do work in a lot of these lower and middle income countries. Do they sometimes not take proper account of local concerns? Yes, certainly that happens. But I actually believe increasingly we have all become aware of the need to understand, to receive, to involve, to integrate local voices around whatever we're doing on the ground. And that's a salutary movement, and I certainly expect it to continue.
Thank you. Just remember to type them in because I can keep asking questions if you'd like. Also in a recent discussion, we were talking about the metrics of ESG and how important it is for companies, particularly able to measure what they're doing in this space, and particularly in the relationship between public benefit and business purpose. And then someone brought up the point that really companies are not able to do that unless the beneficiaries are able to give them the information and are able to measure themselves. And so when it comes to the public sector around the world, I think, again, sort of high income countries versus low income countries, what do you see as the role of the public sector in, or what are some of the challenges of engaging with the public sector in measuring ESG metrics? Or ESG
the question has an interesting premise, EJ. First off, I acknowledge that sustainability platforms inside companies, environmental, social, governance performance have sometimes in the past admitted to difficulty in measurement. But we've gotten much better today.
How are we doing, Sam?
I think that the work that companies have done over the last several years in trying to make certain that they could measure.
Okay, so we don't know if Mesvin is coming at this point. We're just going to assume he's not.
I'm sorry. Hi, Chelsea. I'm sorry. We're hearing you. Sorry about that. Sorry, Robert.
That's okay. I actually think we've gotten better at measurement, and we're doing our best to make the work we do in sustainability more of a hard measurement. I know that Merck, for example, is doing a great, Merck KGA is doing a lot of work around sustainability, business value, and they're trying to harden their metrics. I think just as we sort of create formulas and other kinds of things in other areas, we'll have to be more thoughtful about this. The need to have third parties sort of evaluate some of the kind of work you do. You have data around some of the work you do, have third parties, partner with them to evaluate some of the work we do. When I was at Pfizer, one of the things we often did when we sort of launched a new soft program, we always invited a third-party evaluator sort of to help us develop the hard measurements around some of those things so that we could report them to our stakeholders in a way that our stakeholders would appreciate. I think that's one area of tremendous opportunity for the private sector and civil society, is to establish more partnerships around evaluating, inviting them in to understand the kind of work you're doing and help you guide some of the work so that we have a story to tell about the impact we've had over time. I think government has its hands full of being accountable itself. And our job is to make them accountable. I think more and more companies and more investors are asking to know about what companies are doing to ensure that they understand that there's a larger value than shareholder value. I just think that conversation has matured to a point now where we can make some real progress. At least that is what I am seeing.
Thank you. We just have a minute left, but I have one other question here from Lori. Access and affordability are not the same. How does profit interact with the need to provide access to everyone, everywhere, when cost is an issue? And, you know, in a minute. Sorry, that's a very big question.
Well, you know, I get this question a lot. I've heard it a lot. Yes, access and affordability are not the same thing. But the point of access in the pharma context is to get medicines to people affordably, highly discounted, highly concessionary prices, donated in some instances. And I know people sort of yell and scream about donations, but donations have made a huge difference in a number of areas in the world. I think the issue of how companies engage with governments and other actors around pricing is a live issue, which is also why I don't believe that the halo effect of vaccine development and deployment will last unless we address issues of expanding access and ensuring that people in places that require treatments get them on a basis where they can afford them. That's engagement with governments. That's new financing arrangements between multilateral actors. It is other private sector partners helping pharma and others figure out how to make their products more affordable. It is far more complex than sort of sometimes we make it out to be, but it is not an impossible effort to undertake.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And if anyone else has any burning questions, then in the chat box, you'll see a link to our community of practice where you can add questions. And I really, really want to thank Robert for your very insightful and inspiring ideas and challenging us to think creatively. And there's so many points in your presentation that I think resonate with everybody in this room. So again, I just you are indeed the perfect person to set us off on this meeting today. So I appreciate your time and thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. Thank you.